today for this special guest lecture. I'm just going to start to make a very brief presentation about our special guest today. Zack Homer is an entrepreneur and a senior director of product management from New York City in the United States. And he's going to be speaking about two very important topics. First of all, how to understand and identify the customer need or problems so our company can have the best possible solution for these kind of expectations. And also he's going to be talking about minimal viable product and stakeholder alignment to the strategy of the organization. So welcome, Zack. Thank you very much for giving us this special guest lecture. And well, we can start right now. Thank you, Zack.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Professor Esparza, and thank you, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thanks for letting me, join your class today. So as the professor mentioned, my specialty is in entrepreneurship and product management. And I guess before we jump in, we'll be doing some fun activities today that I think hopefully will be very fun and valuable and informative. Has anyone heard of the term product management? And please feel free if you have heard of it or know anything about sort of what this field is about, please feel free to jump in. Has anyone heard this term before?
I think it has something to do regarding planification and provision of the product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Any other sort of thoughts or comments on kind of what product management is?
Is it also looking at the quality, like administering the quality the product has and how it can be sold or even optimized?
Yeah, I think these are all great answers. And what's funny is that I think that if you were to Google product management, you would get 1,000 different definitions because it's a very wide ranging field. But the way that I like to think about it kind of in its simplest terms is identifying and building the right products for a company's customers. So everything from coming up with what should we build, why should we build it, who should we market to, all of those things would fall under product management. And when you think about, in particular, such as tech organizations, for example, Facebook or Google or anything like that, when they're launching a new app or a new platform, this field would encompass why they're building that, and then ultimately what that should look like, what features should be included, et cetera. So it's a pretty wide-ranging field. And so what I'd like to do today is really focus in on this field and kind of do a fun activity in which we pretend that all of you will be my customers, okay? So rather than sort of thinking up a fake sort of hypothetical business scenario, I want this to be really both valuable and fun and personal for us today. And so I'm going to ask everyone here a question, and I'm going to ask you, what do you want to learn from me in today's class, right? So it sounds kind of like a funny question, right? But I'm going to pretend to be, in this case, the product manager. You're all my customers here. And in going through this exercise, I think it will be very informative and show us some of the techniques that are used to ultimately determine what should we build for our customers. So again, just the question is, what do you want to learn from me in today's class, given my experience and my background, et cetera? And a quick note, obviously in the real world, conducting this type of research is more involved than simply asking a question, what do you want, right? Of course, but I think for today, it's a good starting point to illustrate some of the techniques that we'll go through. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and I hope that everyone has the Google Jamboard link that the professor shared. So let me share here. Can everyone see the Jamboard here?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And hopefully everyone has the link. If not, please just put in the chat and we can provide it again as well. So, but what we're going to do using this Jamboard is I'm going to ask everyone to jump in and make a number of sticky notes. And so to do that, just for context, this little icon here off to the left, you can just click sticky note. You can click a different color, and then ultimately write in your comment on the sticky note. And so just for context and reference again, we're going to answer the question, what do you want to learn in today's class from me? And I'm going to ask you on each separate sticky note to write down a different idea. So feel free to create more than one sticky notes. You can create as many as you'd like. And, so on each sticky note, just include one idea, one question, one topic. So as an example, maybe one sticky note, I put How do I become a product manager? Or what is it like to work with software developers? Or you have a business idea, how do I start it, right? So it can be any question, anything that you want to learn today. And yeah, here's a great one here already starting. So feel free, let's take another, let's say 5 minutes or so. And let's just create as many sticky notes as you like, anything that you find interesting. And once we're finished with that, we'll go through and kind of jump into the next activity. So let's give it around 5 minutes or so.
No lo sé.
We have some really excellent questions and comments here. Let's give it a few more minutes in case anyone is still working, and feel free to please comment if you need a lot more time, but we'll give it a few more minutes and then we can get started in terms of the next step here. Okay, I'm going to jump in, and please feel free, if anyone is still writing, please feel free to keep adding sticky notes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag some of these down a little bit because I'm going to include a few titles here at the top and get us into our next step of this activity. So I'm just going to bring these down a little bit. And so, first of all, thank you so much, everyone. You guys are amazing already. These are amazing comments, amazing questions. We have a lot of great comments here to work with, and I'm really excited for kind of walking us through some of these prioritization techniques that these techniques are used in the real world. I've used them in my career. I've used them with internal stakeholders, with customers. These are not theoretical exercises. These are real, real techniques and methodologies that are used. And so I'm excited to share everyone here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 3 words here at the top of the screen. So I'm going to write must have, should have, and nice to have. And so when we think about all of these ideas, and again, this is sort of a hypothetical, right? You're all my customers. I'm the product manager here. I'm trying to determine what is the most important thing to focus on, right? So we've generated a ton of good comments, a ton of good questions. But the question is, which one should we focus on today, right? And that becomes a question of priorities. How do we prioritize these? And so one of the most common techniques is something called Moscow analysis. And this stands for must have, could have, should have, could have, and won't have. It's just, let me just write it out here. This is sort of the acronym here, just for everyone's understanding. So must have, and then you can see should have, could have, won't have. In this case, this is, I think for the purposes of today's class, doing this sort of just 3-column as opposed to 4 works for us pretty nicely. So this is just a simpler version of that. But the point is that we have 3 different columns: must have, should have, and nice to have. And these are ways in which we can think about when we're organizing these comments and these questions, what is an absolute must have? And in this example, right, so for today's class, that you really need to know, right? So what I want to do is I want everyone to go and identify the sticky notes that they created. And I want you to drag your sticky notes into one of these 3 columns. And when you think about this, think about it in the sense of, in this example, what does it take to become a good product manager? Is this something that you feel that you need to know today? You have an interview next week, and this is critical, or is it sort of more of a, I would like to know this question, but it's not absolutely critical. This is a huge part of product management and just in general in this field. We have a ton of things coming at us, and we really have to decide what are the most important priorities. So obviously, we would love to answer all these questions, but as you can imagine, right, we have limitations in the real world. We have budgets, we have time restrictions, and the same thing here, right? So this class is not 10 hours, right? We have 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I want everyone to drag their sticky notes over to one of these 3 columns. So we'll give everyone a few minutes here, and then we'll start talking it through. And so as we're doing this as well, I would love if anyone is comfortable to volunteer. Could a few people share some of the ideas that you wrote and why you've prioritized it in a particular column? So as an example, if you wrote what led you to become a PM, why do you think that's sort of a must-have? And I'm just curious if you could just share some of your interest in some of these topics. So if anyone wants to just volunteer and kind of give some of their reasoning for why they've put them in this column here.
Yes, sir. So I asked, what led you to become a product manager?
Mhm.
Because as you just mentioned, life works weird for everyone. Like everyone has their own perspective.
Mhm.
So right now I'm studying business administration, but I don't know if in the future I would love to become a product manager, or I would like to be a human resources manager, or something like that. So you maybe had like something in mind before becoming a product manager, and then after you became the product manager, um, what paved the road to become the product manager?
Excellent. Those are really great questions. I love that. Anyone else, just maybe one other person, because I know we're short on time, want to just volunteer maybe one of your comments here?
Yeah, I would like to. I wrote, what is the best advice you could give someone when it comes to product managing and must-haves? Because I'm currently studying global supply chain management, and I know that product managing is extremely essential for that. And I would just like to get like every perspective possible when it comes to that, because I know it on the logistics side, but I would like to see it like on the business side, maybe.
Cool. Excellent. Excellent. Cool. Anyone else? Maybe we'll do one last comment if anyone else wants to share their comment.
Yeah, me. Just have a. I'm just gonna read my two questions. Okay, so what's the name of the company where you work and what are the best and worst decisions you have made in order to accomplish your company's objectives as a product manager? I'm asking you why you choose a company, because depending on whatever company you're choosing, it's gonna have like a good or bad results in shaping your critical thinking. And depending on the company and the atmosphere you also choose, it will help you, like, I don't know, like decide what are the best and worst decisions, objectives to accomplish that particular goal.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for those comments. And thanks everyone again for all of these sticky notes. They're all great. I wish we could answer all of them today, and I'm hopeful that maybe we can get to some of them. But as you can see here, this is a good first step to, we started with, what do we have here? Maybe 20 different sticky notes, lots of different ideas. And we're starting to prioritize them. We're starting to think about what is critical, what do we want to know today, versus maybe some other ones that would be nice, but certainly not essential for, the hour that we have today. So part 2 of this, or let's call part 1A and part 1B, I just want everyone to do one last thing before we move on to the next frame here. And so I want everyone to create a green sticky note. I'm going to do it here just as an example. You can just put like a money sign, a dollar sign here. And I want you to make it very small, and everyone's going to get 1. And I want you to put it right next to the one that looks most interesting. And what I'll do here is, let's see if we can make this a little bit easier to spread these out. It doesn't have to be your sticky note. Maybe that, you wrote a few of the ones over here, but you go, oh, wow, what product has been the most fun? This sounds amazing. I want to know this today, right? And so everyone just get 1 green sticky note, put a dollar sign there, and just put it next to one of the must-have sticky notes here that you're most interested in. And this is sort of another way in which we can further prioritize and identify, as you, my customers, what looks most interesting. And this is going to be sort of part 2 that'll help us go into the next section here. So let's just give it a couple minutes. I know this is a little bit messy, but let's put it off to the right, let's say, or kind of hovering over. Yeah, this is perfect. And we'll put those dollar signs here. Cool. So it looks like we have a few different, it's spread around, not totally focused on one, but it looks like this particular sticky note has 2. The what products have been the most fun to manage, this has 2. So this is helping us, further understand just what might be the most important. There's actually a methodology called buy a feature. This is a very simplified version of that. I would say it's a little more of a complex thing that we're not going to do today, but just for context, this is just another example of a technique that helps us get at what should be the top priority. And just to be honest, literally, even if you did not end up going into product management as your career. I literally use this technique when I've looked for housing or apartments, right? You can kind of put different features. You can determine what is critical for you, what are sort of nice to have. So I would recommend, honestly, even in your personal lives, this is an extremely helpful and valuable tool and methodology that can be used that helps kind of refine your thinking and really hone in on what is the most important to me or to my customers in this case. So let's move on then. So what I'm going to do is let me actually just share the next frame here, and then we'll copy a few things over. So what we have here is a list of great sticky notes, right? We refined it a little bit. We have our must-haves, and now we have our list, let's say, of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or so, right? That are must-have. So these are what we're going to be focusing on. Now, in the real world, in the business world, we have limitations, right? So in a business, we have a budget restriction or constraint. We have timing constraints, right? So in the sense of a technical team where we want to launch an app or a website, we have, development costs and effort that might take, one feature might take 9 months to build, another one might take 2 weeks, right? So we have lots of different constraints. We have internal stakeholders that have their own opinions that we have to satisfy. And so we need a system and a way really to determine which of these features, if you will go into what we build, or in this case, in today, what we'll talk about, right? And so one of the best ways to do this, and one of the common methods, is something called a value versus complexity prioritization framework. Long-term, long title, but the point here is I put here on the screen a chart, and on the axis, the y-axis off to the left, we have value. You can also think of that as impact, or how important, let's say, this would be to our customers or to yourself, et cetera. And so we have low to high. And then on the horizontal axis, we have effort and complexity. And so this would be how long does it take, or how much work would it take to build or to develop this. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to copy over our 8 or so sticky notes onto this chart. So we'll just place them here for now. Just give me 1 second here. I wish Google let me do it all at once, but it doesn't. So just give me 2 seconds here. We got 3 more and then we're finished. I would say the effort on this is high. So dragging these over. I think we got everything here. Let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to place these off to the right here a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to collaboratively, you can also feel free to essentially pull these, but I'd like us to essentially talk it through and brainstorm and do this activity collaboratively. I want us to put each of these sticky notes on this chart with these axes in mind. So for instance, and some of these are a little more complex. And again, I know this is sort of a slightly weird scenario because we're doing it, this is not a business feature, but it's a way to illustrate, I think, how we go about this method. And so we're going to put these particular sticky notes on this chart for how valuable or impactful getting an answer to these questions would be. So this would be higher up on the chart, and then how much effort it will take. And I can help with this as well. So as an example, like answering what led me to become a product manager, that might take 5 minutes. Giving an answer to, maybe one of the other questions, maybe this is incredibly more complex and more involved. And so again, this is just an exercise, I think, just for today, kind of a fun way to do this. But let's go ahead and, feel free to drag some of these stickies, and let's talk it through why we think, one particular note is more complex than another, why it might be more valuable. And ultimately what the goal here is that once we have this on the chart and we all agree on it, what you'll see is that it becomes very clear which items are going to be included in what we call our minimum viable product. So let me write this out here just so everyone is familiar with this term. This is a very, very common term and something that is important to be aware of. So a minimum viable product is ultimately essentially the minimum set of features that are used to validate a product in the field. And so what that means is that, as an example, when we want to launch our version 1 of an app, let's say, right, or a website or a new product, we don't want to spend 1 year to build every little bell and whistle, right, and put it in that product, launch it to our customers, and then find out that they hate it, right? That would be a giant waste of time. It would be terrible. And so what you want to do is you want to focus on our minimum viable product, which is what is the quickest product we can launch to customers. We can get some feedback so we can start to understand and learn and iterate and ultimately refine our product to make it better. And so this is ultimately, if you want to think of it in sort of tech terms, it's sort of version 1 or beta testing, whatever you want to call it. It's ultimately the minimum product that we would launch. And so when we think about that, this chart is incredibly helpful because this top left quadrant that I'll just put a square around here. This would represent our minimum viable product. I'll just delete that. But because you have the highest value and the lowest effort. So this is ultimately sort of the biggest bang for our buck, if you will, in terms of what we would launch to our customers and with the lowest amount of effort. I hope that all makes sense, and we can definitely talk it through a little bit more. But this framework is used very commonly in product management. I've presented to many teams, executive stakeholders, and this is an incredibly clear way to show to your stakeholders, here's what we're going to be building, and this top quadrant, we all agree on it. Let's move forward. And so rather than having ambiguity and sort of people asking questions, this is a really helpful visual to help everyone understand what we're going to be building. So with that, with my long discussion there, let me turn it over to everyone. Does anyone want to volunteer and say why, let's say, this sticky note is top left versus another one? Just, please jump in and feel free to share your reasoning for why this would be, any of these sticky notes would be in the place that they are.
Well, I think that for what has been the greatest challenge for you to, as a product manager, is like a high value question, because we all face challenges every day. Yep. And you being the product manager, what has been the product that you've thought, oh my God, can we really take this out? Are people going to like it?
Absolutely. That's a great point. I like that a lot. How about the second note here? Give us some advice before we graduate, like recommendations to start working before becoming a PM. What are some thoughts on why this is a very high value item here?
That is actually not mine, but I kind of put it in there because I think that is a great question, since a lot of us are graduating this December. So it may be like a good guide to ask you that take advantage of your experience.
Excellent, excellent. How can we start in this specialty? What made this a little bit less on the value axis here than some of these other ones? If anyone has any thoughts on this. Moving it down. That's fine. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the point of this exercise is that this is all estimates, right? We're all sort of, this is not an exact science, of course, but I want to point out a few things because I really like the way we thought about a few of these notes. So as an example, how do you develop your own project? right? So great question, very valuable, very helpful. However, to the point of the individual or others who move this to the right, this is a little more of a complex question, right? This is not 5 minutes. There's many different interpretations. There's different types of projects. And so moving it over to the complexity, I would even potentially move it here. It makes it clear that this is going to take some more work. And again, this is, again, a fun kind of example today. But if we wanted to think about this in terms of actual app, let's say, or in technical product management, or building a product, maybe this one represents, you know, a feature that is awesome potentially, but is going to take 8 months to build, right? And so that's kind of the comparison here. And so when we're looking at these different quadrants, we would not focus on this, because when we're talking about a minimum viable product up here, again, we're focusing on this top left quadrant because we want to get something out into the field. We want to launch a product as quickly as we can and get feedback, because that is the most important way. And I can tell you from my personal experience that the longer things take to launch, and you know, we think we know, but the reality is once products are in customers' hands, we start to learn many things that we might have thought differently before, right? So in my experience, I launched a product with one feature in particular, and I thought it was going to go great. It didn't go as well as I thought, but I was very happy they launched it quickly, because you learn that very quickly once it's, you know, you're getting feedback. So anyway, that's kind of just a quick background in terms of why we're focusing on the top left quadrant here. How about maybe one or two more? Any thoughts on what product has been the most fun to manage? Why do we think this might be helpful, or maybe more important than, let's say, what led you to become a PM? Because this is technically higher than this one right now. Any thoughts on this?
I think that, well, I've always heard that if you have fun, you'll never work a day in your life. So
I like that.
so what is the most like a product that you've said, I have enjoyed making this. I have enjoyed the process, and what yeah, I would just leave it at that. Thank you.
Excellent. I love that reasoning for that. Cool. So I guess before we move on, any questions or comments in terms of how this process works, how you might in the real world maybe utilize this process to present to internal, external teams? Any questions at all in terms of what we did here and sort of how we got to this place? Cool. Okay, so now we have the fun part, right? So I think this was kind of a fun way to go about it, because again, with this hypothetical scenario in mind, I started off as the product manager with you as my customers. And I said, what do you want to learn today? Because the truth is, I could have come in here and lectured on anything, right? Or talked about anything. But instead, I focused, as a product manager, you focus completely on your customers. You want to provide and launch something that is valuable to them, right? And so what we did is we went through this exercise, the Moscow analysis. We used the dollar signs to indicate a little more interest. And then we thought about the complexity, because we have limitations in the real world. And what we've come up with here is, I'm just going to move this up a little bit just to kind of make this fully clear, is a minimum viable product that is focused on this top left square here. And we have 3 questions. And so these are the 3 that we're going to talk about today, right? And so we're going to start with those. And I would say that's our minimum viable product. Let's say we have more time. Let's say that in the real world, you have more resources than you thought you might have originally. You can then move on to the top right quadrant, for instance. These would be more of our, if you will, should haves, right? So a little more complexity, but let's say we have more time than we wanted. What is the name of the company where you work, and what are the best and worst decisions you have made, right? So we can get to those as well, but this is the main kind of quadrant that we want to focus on. And so with that, now is the fun part. Let's talk about these questions, because ultimately I am here for you guys, and I'm super excited to be here, and I want to make sure I can provide as much value as I can to all of you. So let's start with some of these questions here. what has been your greatest challenge as a product manager? Really, really great question. And I would say that one of the challenges in this role is you are in many ways the center point of when it comes to building a product. You are the center point with a ton of different stakeholders and many people coming at you from many different directions. The reason I was pausing because I was literally thinking about a diagram, which you can probably find online. But if you want to think of product manager in the middle and you have all marketing, sales, all of it around, all of it feeds to you. And so one of the biggest challenges is maintaining composure and maintaining your sense of calm when you have a ton of things coming at you. Because as you saw from the exercises today with these prioritization activities, priority is going to be the #1 word that is your friend and your enemy and the thing to focus on as a product manager. So really, to answer this question, the biggest challenge I think is handling all those different priorities that come at you. You have executive teams that are asking you to build something. You have customers that say, we want this now. You have your customer support team that says, we have a bug and the platform is not doing XYZ. It's not working right now on this particular area. You have sales team that says, hey, we need to sell more to this school district. In my example, in the United States, we need to build this feature to satisfy their need. You have 1,000 questions coming at you, right? And so the biggest problem is, and the biggest challenge is, what do you do first? How do you decide who to satisfy, who to talk to, and who to ultimately listen to in some sense to build what you're going to build? So I think that is kind of my overarching answer to this question, is that this field, and I think this role, if you're interested in it, just requires you to really have that sense of priority and utilize techniques like these and user research to really base your decisions, because otherwise it can become very overwhelming to decide who to listen to, where to go, what to build, etc. I hope that sort of is a fair answer to this. Any other questions, I guess, on this topic? Anyone or whoever wrote it? I'm hopeful that that sort of answered it, but any other questions related to that?
Not from my part. Thank you.
Great. Cool. So I don't want to make it sound so terrible, but it is definitely a big challenge and sort of pushes you to maintain your composure, but it's totally worth it. And it honestly, it builds your skill set, not only in your personal life, but in your professional life, to maintain that composure and really prioritize. So let's go to the next one here in our MVP. Give some advice for us before we graduate, like recommendations to start working before becoming a PM. Really, really great question. And so I'm going to answer this, I think, in a few different ways. So when I think about product management and sort of this general field, I think there's kind of three, maybe a few more, but 3 different ways to get in it. And so here would be my recommendations. #1, a way to get into this field is to do it directly, right? So they have product management courses. So as an example, obviously you're taking business, courses here, but there are boot camps, there are many different organizations that provide product management certificates. So if you're really interested and for instance, that like this sounds really interesting to you, that would be a good, at least starting point to look into those courses, to look at some videos online, just start to learn about it. That's sort of one way to sort of start focusing on that. #2 is absolutely not an easy way or a simple way, but it's the way that I got into it, which is to start your own business. And because in many ways, I see product management as the sort of employee version of an entrepreneur, because in many ways you are sort of wearing all those different hats and you are managing all the different stakeholders, you're deciding what to build. And so it plays many similar roles, and I've played in both those in my experience, similar roles. So that's kind of a second version. It's not sort of a straightforward way to get into it, but if you are interested in entrepreneurship, it is something that is totally worth it, in my opinion, and one way to kind of learn the skill sets. So, but a third way, which is, I would say, very common, I've seen many different people go into these roles in my organization, is sort of being on a tangential track, if you will, and then pivoting over into it, right? So as an example, if you are someone working in customer support, in customer experience, and you are talking with customers, you start to learn, what do our customers want? What do they need? And ultimately, you know your customers so well that when there's an open role for product management, you're sort of the most obvious choice because you know your customers really well. Let's say you're in marketing. So you're marketing, ultimately you understand the markets, and you know sort of the different techniques that you're using to get to the customers. You're another obvious choice for sort of working in product management. It sort of becomes a very easy fit because you know the customers and you know some of the techniques and various things like that. So those are kind of some of the different ways, I would say, just to get into product management in the first place. But getting back to this question though, more specifically, giving someone advice before you graduate, I would say that number one, if you're interested in this, definitely start reading about it. Like I said, take some courses. If you Google it, there's at this point a number of different boot camps, hopefully some of online free videos. I actually took one course, it was through General Assembly. They have a UX design course, which was great as well. So that is one tip. Number two, obviously there's books about it, product management, and that's another way to learn about it. I would say number three, if you're interested in tech, design is enormous, right? So I work with designers every single day, and knowing what is good design, but knowing about design principles, knowing about font, about colors, about the structure of how a website is designed, knowing that will put you way ahead of so many people. Because in many ways, product management, it's hard to find people that know everything, right? So, but if you are an expert in design, you know design principles, you know about color, and you know about structure and sort of UX principles. If you know about engineering, so if someone is interested in software engineering, learning about that a little bit, again, there are boot camps. That's another thing that puts you kind of in a good place. So I would say just follow your passion. And if you're interested in engineering more so, some people are more interested in development, some people are more interested in design, other people are more interested in marketing. I would start to think about like what seems most interesting, and read about it a little bit, and go from there. And I know there's obviously a ton of steps, and those are a lot of different ideas, but the truth is that it really is a multidisciplinary field, which is why I'm saying so many different things, because this is not like, oh, just learn sales, right? Like this encompasses many, many different topics, including strategy, design, development, marketing, customer support. I mean, there's so many different things that get into it. And so learning all about those different areas that are interesting to you, I think is just a great first step. I know that was a very long-winded, windy way of answering that, but I'm hopeful that gave at least a few steps in terms of some advice on what to do. So let's move on. And again, please stop me or jump in if anyone has any other questions or would like to kind of clarify any of these. So let's go to the third sticky note here. What product has been the most fun to manage? So really, really great question. And I would say that for me, just because it has a personal, I have more personal experience with it, I launched a company called HelloSA in 2013, right? So for about 5 years, we sold it in 2018. And we built a number of different things. There were back-end platforms and portals that our customers logged into. There was also a front-end website that students were able to log in. They could select their essay coach, and then it ultimately assigned them, and they were able to work together. For me, that was the most fun product for a few reasons. I would say number one, having full ownership, right? So I think one of the things is that if you're in a smaller company, whether it's your own or if you're just in a smaller startup versus a big company, one thing to keep in mind is that you have a little more say and you have a little more ownership. When you have a lot of different stakeholders, you have a large organization, there are many, many different people that have opinions and perspectives, and this can be difficult to sort of realize your vision that you have in your mind. And so for me, having more of that ownership has been extremely helpful. And so on Hello Essay, our front end websites, the design was extremely fun. The way, the interactions in which students could identify their editor, interact with them, just from simple things for the colors all the way to just the design elements. For me, it was extremely fun, had total ownership over it. And yeah, and it was very impactful. So for me, that has been the most fun. I would say the corollary of that, the least fun, tends to be, in my opinion, products that you have less ownership of, that maybe you're less involved in, that are less design oriented. This is my perspective, but I sort of like the front end facing perspective, whereas a back end portal that's, you know, uses databases, and it's just not as much fun for me because I like design a lot. So you also obviously though have to determine sort of what is your passion, what type of products would you be interested in building, and really, you know, follow that direction.
Sorry, I have a question.
Mhm.
So as you mentioned, like a product manager, you have like a lot of skills like marketing and sales. So in
Yeah.
this case, with this specific product that you launched, it is also necessary like for a product manager to know like design, like web design and all that other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really great question. So here's how I'll answer this. So the term product manager, I think, can really differ between what company you're in, what industry you're working in. Is it a digital product? There's literally product managers that aren't necessarily, I keep referring to technology and digital products. There are product managers for non-digital products. So it's not a one size fits all by any means. However, in the sense of digital products, what I'm referring to here, absolutely web design, software development is critical, really, really important. When you think about a product manager working at Google or Twitter or any of these big companies, these big tech companies, so a lot of them are former software developers, a lot of the product managers, a lot of them are former designers. You need to know the elements and the basics at least. What I will say is that it's not absolutely critical to be a designer or to know how to code, absolutely not. I myself, actually, I do a little bit, but I wouldn't trust a website that I would build, right? But it's important because you're talking with people, your colleagues, your software developers, your designers, and you need to know the same language, right? So whether or not you can actually design something on screen yourself, not necessary by any means, but if you are working with a designer, you need to be able to understand when they talk to you and say, I'm looking to make this type of interaction, what do you think? You need to know the lingo, you need to know the language, and it's important just to understand the context and the reasoning behind some of those decisions. So does that sort of answer the question in terms of just sort of why it might be helpful to know some of these background disciplines?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, great. Cool. All right. So we are moving along. I think we have what till 2:45, I think. So we actually have moved beyond our minimum viable product, and we're getting these questions, which is great. I think this is great. We have enough time now to really answer some of these questions while I'm here. So let's move over. Again, we're going to move over to the right here because we kind of determined these are pretty valuable. So what is the name of the company where you work, and what are the best and worst decisions you have made in order to accomplish your company's objectives as a product manager? Great questions. So number one, the name of the company where I've worked for the last 4 years or so is called the College Board. And the College Board is the education company that owns and runs, for anyone familiar with the SAT, this is the standardized test that is used in the United States. They also do AP, which is advanced placement courses in high school. And the program that I led is called Pre-AP. It was a new product about 5 years ago or so that launched to 9th graders. So the name of the company is the College Board, and anyone in the US who had to take the SAT will hate the name because it's a standardized, difficult test that students hate having to take, or a lot of them. Some of them like it, I guess. But anyway, that's the name of the company. And what are some of the best and worst decisions you have made to accomplish your company's objectives? Really great question. So let me talk about the best decisions that I've made. So one of the things that when I came into my company was that this was an entirely new division in Pre-AP, as I mentioned, is a new program. And there's a couple things that I think about in terms of best decisions. Number one is building some systems and processes to organize stakeholders and people in terms of meetings, in terms of decision-making. So what can happen is, as I mentioned, you have a lot of different people that want to be involved, right? You have, as I mentioned, sales, marketing, there's 12 to 15 different divisions, right? And you're going to have lots of different opinions and perspectives. And so one of the things that we did is we established a process of meetings and essentially protocols where if someone has a request, it will come in through a tool that we call Jira in terms of here's a feature that we would like to have. We would have bi-weekly meetings with all of these stakeholder representatives, and then also do these quarterly planning meetings where every quarter we would say, here are the priorities, kind of what we're doing here today. Here are the different priorities that we could work on. What do we think as a group makes the most sense and really are getting toward our goals? And what can we leave out? What are our nice to haves, et cetera? And so by doing that, we had all of our stakeholders aligned. We had these big meetings where, in some sense, similar to this again, we had visuals. We said, here's what we're going to work on. Here's why. And every quarter, and then also every week in terms of more detailed work, we would be aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it sounds obvious, right? But the truth is a lot of organizations are not doing that. And it's more like people running around saying, here, we need this, right? And it can be crazy. And that's kind of what I saw when I first came in. And so I think one lesson, and hopefully you can take this into your future in any other role, is that when you have that many perspectives, it's really important to have protocols and rules essentially that allow people to give their opinion, but in a focused way so that, like you don't have chaos essentially, right? You have focus. And so one of the things that I think was the best decision was bringing focus to those meetings and focus to those decisions. And I think that's kind of number one. And I think that sort of as a result of that, in many ways, a second best decision, I think, was focusing very intently on user research. And so one of the things before I came in that the company was doing a lot of, I think, was more kind of top down, here's what we think customers want, right? And here's what executive teams are looking for, and let's build it. And we kind of changed this to be more customer driven, meaning every single decision has to be driven in research, from interviews, from surveys, from talking to our customers, from doing exercises like this, literally asking, what are we looking for? What would be the most valuable? And so by driving and focusing on user research, and in terms of design, doing usability testing, which means making sure the designs make sense, you have evidence to back up all of your decisions, everything that you're deciding to do. And what I really saw out of that, to be honest, is that over time, we started hearing from customers, wow, like this is looking good. This is great. I love this. I love this. And that's what you're living for as a product manager, really, is you want your customers to love it. They'll tell other people, sales will improve. So, your goal is to please your customers. And so I think that some of the meaning structures, again, that I mentioned, and protocols, and the focus on user research really helped us improve in many ways and make our customers happy. So worst decisions, let me think about this. So I think one comes to mind. So we actually built a feature in the platform that are used by teachers and students. And this is something that was indicated by many teachers. They thought it'd be interesting, particularly during COVID. It was a remote sort of distance learning tool that would allow them to have these group activities, hard to describe, but they would have group activities on screen. They could work with their students. We ended up building that, and it was not used even close to what we thought it was. And part of the reason was just rushing this out because of COVID, and it was urgent because they couldn't use some of the physical books that we had, and so we need to be able to help our teachers. But I think doing a little more due diligence would have been very helpful. And so sometimes rushing decisions and not really thinking it through, as much as there are obviously timing constraints and we want to get things out quickly. But I would say that was a pretty bad decision because that took up development time, it took up design time, it took money. And that was definitely one of the mistakes that I plan to not make in the future, which is just to, as much as you have a timing need, you really want to make sure you're building the right thing, because once it's too late, you've already spent the time and the effort. So I would say that's probably one of the bad decisions. Any other topics or questions on that one before we move on? Cool. So let's do one or two more, and then I think we may be out of time. So what does it take to become a good product manager? So, excuse me, really good question. So I think I alluded to one of the different areas, but I'm going to expand a little bit more when I answer this question. So number one, as I mentioned, is the ability to have composure, and when you have 1,000 priorities come at you, having those techniques where you can actually prioritize. So I think number one is prioritization. When you think about a good product manager, what I envision when I think about that term good product manager is that they have a system in which they're able to say, okay, I have these 100 priorities. Which ones do we do now? Which ones can we do later, and why? And if you can answer that very clearly and then explain it to your stakeholders and explain it to your team, it makes everything so much better, because you're always going to have people coming at you. Excuse me. You're always going to have people coming at you with different. Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So we're always going to have different stakeholders that are asking of us different requests and different questions and different priorities. And so number one, it's important to be able to prioritize and have a system for that. Number two, I think just when you think of a good product manager, is communication. I can't stress enough just how important, and to be honest, in any role in business, if you had to focus on one skill, obviously the hard skills are important, learning design, development, whatever the particular specialty is, that's amazing. But particularly in larger organizations, I would say that for this role, at least 60, 70% of it is communication and negotiation. And it's talking with team members, and you might think you have a great idea and a good reason for it, but if you can't communicate and articulate that properly, then it becomes an enormous problem. And when I think about any of the mistakes that I made in my personal experiences at work, it's a misunderstanding, whether it's an email that was misunderstood, or not providing the right data, or a meeting that went wrong, right? So the ability to communicate. So as I said, number one, prioritization. Number two, you be able to articulate and communicate exactly why you're doing something and what is the reasoning for it. That makes all the difference. And what I found is that using data, this is kind of maybe a corollary of number two, but if you're able to use data for all decisions, it's really hard to argue with that, right? So if you can say our customers are looking for this, here's the data that supports that based on interviews and surveys and et cetera, that is really hard to push against. And so using those three things, I think when you're in the role itself, becomes amazing if you're focusing on those three priorities. I would say when we think about this question, what does it take to become? So that's sort of once you're in the role. But to become a product manager, some of the things that we mentioned earlier, learning design, learning development and the basics about web development, learning about how marketing, just generally how markets or products are taken to market, right? Learning some of the prioritization techniques that we've gone through today. There are many other ones as well. All of these things allow you to have a system in which you can take information, filter it, and then make decisions. Because that's really kind of all you're doing if you really want to break this down, right? So you have things coming at you, customers want things, stakeholders want different things, and you're taking all that information, you're filtering it, and you're deciding what is the best decision for our customers. That's sort of in a sense, in a nutshell, what the job is. And so I think focusing on that particular skill set is really critical. Cool. So how about we do, Professor Esparza, I don't know if there's any sort of final comments. I know probably running on time a little bit. Maybe I'll do one more comment here, and then we can maybe open it up to the group, or if there's any sort of final items we'd like to address. But what is the best advice you could give someone when it comes to product management? And I think some of this will also sort of be part of the last sticky note here is, I would say the best advice, again, number one, getting into it. We've already talked about it, learning about design, development, marketing, all those different skills. I would say once, if you're in the role itself, what is the best advice? Again, communication, prioritization, and thinking about evidence based on research to defend those decisions. And then finally, keeping your customers always number one, meaning that you might have different stakeholders you're talking to, and they want different things and other groups want different things. But at the end of the day, and I think, to be honest, this is really probably, if you remember only one thing, this is it, which is that your customer is the most important thing. They are the most important person to please, because they are the source of revenue, they are the source of feedback, they are the source of everything. And so keeping your customers number one, despite internal groups debating and negotiating, et cetera, at the end of the day, it's someone using your app or website in the digital sense, and how they feel about it and what they like about it. So always doing everything for your customer. I think if I had to give any advice for any of this, would be my number one piece of advice. So let me stop there. I think there were a few comments here. Professor Esparza, I don't know if there was, are there any other thoughts or maybe questions from the group here? Anything that we'd like to talk about?
Okay, everyone, we can start making our final comments so we can close this very interesting guest lecture. Just to mention, Zach, this was been great. Thank you for all the information. And I think that everyone can take your experiences as something valuable for them to make the decisions about going into this professional field or maybe another, right? So please, if any of you have any final questions to be closing this special guest lecture.
Yeah, I have a question. If you don't want, you cannot answer.
Okay.
Has your mental health ever been affected while being a product manager? Like dealing with so much stress? I believe that, since you mentioned that you have all these people coming at you trying to match the product, I believe that some of the people might be not so educated or not so maybe like they're really aggressive, or their approach is not what it should be. So has it ever affected you? Like, oh my God, I'm stressing, I gotta deliver this for this day, and I don't know if I'll be able to deliver because right now I'm just stressing too much.
Yeah, no, amazing question. Really, really important question, right? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? So I think a couple of things. Number one, I think any job, right? This is not unique necessarily. There can be stressors. It could be the industry you're in. It could be maybe your company. There's deadlines, right? Work is always going to be stressful in some capacity. I would say the unique thing about product management, to your point, is that you do have a lot of people coming at you, and for sure it can be stressful at times. What I will say though is that a couple of things. Number one, you kind of build, I found that you can build that over time, and it really serves you not only in your professional life, but in your personal life, right? Because there's going to be priorities and things coming at us in all aspects of life, right? And the ability, as I mentioned, I literally have used this technique, the first one that we did, when I was looking for an apartment, for example, to determine, because I was really kind of like stressing over which one do I take and some of the different, features of them. It was kind of hard. So the point is that using these techniques while things are stressful and the role always will have a lot, it becomes a little more of a system and less of, oh my God, I have 1,000 people coming at me. It becomes more of, okay, well, here's how requests come in. Here's our sort of reasoning for picking why we do something. And so therefore, obviously, we're going to do this over this, right? So I think that has been really helpful to take away the stress, having those systems and having techniques like this, because otherwise it would just sort of feel like a ton. But to your point though, absolutely, it can be a stressful field, but I think taking the right steps and using some of these methods, and then obviously doing some stress reduction, it can make it better.
Thank you very much.
I will say also that, again, I don't know if anyone here is going to go into product management or not, but if you are, I will say, despite the stress that was just mentioned, it's incredibly valuable and I think a rewarding field. You're involved in so much. And if you're interested in starting your business, as an example, this is a great starting point for that. And so despite the stress, I think you learn so much, and it's totally worth it, I think.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so well, thank you very much, Zach. This was a really great talk. And if any one of you wants to keep in touch with Zach, I can share you his contact. And also, well, for further questions or comments, you can also be in touch with this specialist. So thank you, everyone. I hope that you like this special presentation, and I'll see you next week. Thank you, Zach. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Professor.